Karen Slattery was born on September 18, 1969, in New York. She was the second child in a devout Catholic family, with a loving mother, father, and an older brother. When Karen was just a year old, the family made a fresh start in Florida, eventually settling in the quiet coastal town of Palm Beach. As she grew, Karen thrived. She attended the local Catholic school and threw herself into sports and extracurriculars: softball, swimming, gymnastics. Living near the ocean, she and her friends spent countless days on the beach, soaking in the sun and enjoying the waves. A few years after the move, Karen's younger sister was born, and the two quickly formed a deep bond. The little girl adored Karen, copied her, followed her everywhere, and saw her not just as a sister, but as a role model. At 14, Karen started high school and joined a babysitting program offered through the school. It was a simple idea. Parents in need of childcare could contact the school, which would send a student trained through the program. For Karen, it was a perfect fit. She loved kids, had years of experience caring for her little sister, and now had a chance to earn her own money. She signed up without hesitation. Her kindness, maturity, and natural connection with children quickly made her a favorite among local families. Jobs came easily, and she was always in demand. At the same time, she was excelling in swimming, with her sights set on a college scholarship. By all accounts, Karen Slattery was full of promise, but her bright future would soon be stolen in the most tragic way. On the evening of March 24, 1984, 14-year-old Karen Slattery was scheduled to babysit for a local family she knew well. She had watched their two young daughters many times before. At first, Karen considered turning the job down. She wanted to spend that weekend with friends, but ultimately decided to accept. One of her close friends had recently moved out of state, and Karen was hoping to visit her during the upcoming school break. She needed the money to help pay for the plane ticket. That night, Karen's mother drove her to the family's home. The parents greeted her warmly, reminded her to keep the doors locked, and left for the evening. For several hours, everything was normal. Karen and the two girls played games, watched cartoons, had dinner. Around 9:30 p.m., she put the girls to bed, then returned to the living room and called her best friend. They talked excitedly about the next day. Her friend's dad had gotten them tickets to a baseball game, and they couldn't wait. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. After that call, Karen phoned another friend who was also babysitting that night. They laughed, swapped stories, and Karen mentioned she was heading to the kitchen to grab something to eat. She said she'd call back in a few minutes. She never did. Her friend assumed Karen had just fallen asleep. Around midnight, the girls' parents returned home. Immediately, something felt wrong. The porch light, which they always left on, was off. Inside, the house was dark. The TV had been turned off, and there was no sign of Karen. As the parents approached the house, they noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. Karen had been reminded to lock it. Thinking she may have forgotten, they stepped inside and called her name. No response. They began switching on lights. When they reached the kitchen, they froze in horror. A large pool of blood covered the floor. The wall-mounted phone was swinging by its cord. A trail of blood led from the kitchen down the hallway, straight toward the bedrooms where their daughters were sleeping. Both bedroom doors were closed. A faint light glowed beneath one of them. Panicked, the father told his wife to run to the neighbors and call the police. He stayed behind, paralyzed with fear. His daughters were just behind that door. but the possibility of what he might find kept him from opening it. Within minutes, a patrol officer arrived. He told the father to wait outside, then carefully entered the house. He followed the trail to the girls' room, opened the door, and found both children asleep in bed, unharmed. He gently carried them outside to their parents, who were overcome with relief. But that relief didn't last. They quickly told the officer there was still one more girl in the house, Karen. The officer went back in, following the blood trail to the master bedroom. He pushed open the door. Lying on the floor was a young girl's body. He checked for a pulse. There was none. As the officer stood in the master bedroom, additional police units and paramedics arrived on scene. The victim was soon identified as 14-year-old Karen Slattery. Her clothes were partially missing. A towel had been placed over her face, and her body showed multiple stab wounds. The evidence suggested she had suffered a violent attack. After her body was removed for forensic examination, investigators began combing through the house for clues. In the living room, they found an open window with a cut screen, likely the point of entry. Outside, they discovered boot prints and trampled vegetation beneath several windows, indicating someone may have been watching the home before breaking in. But there was something even more unusual. Alongside the boot prints were barefoot tracks, both in the yard and inside the house, suggesting the intruder had removed their footwear before entering. When detectives spoke with the homeowners, they learned that Karen had always been careful to lock the doors while babysitting. Since the front door was found unlocked, it appeared the killer had used it to exit the home after the crime. Regarding the open window, the couple explained that they had left it slightly open before leaving that evening. It had been a cool, breezy night. Realizing this may have given the perpetrator easy access, they were devastated and overwhelmed with guilt. Police also found bicycle tracks in the yard. The trail led toward the coastal road but ended there, suggesting the intruder had arrived and escaped by bike, vanishing into the night. Forensic investigators attempted to cast the barefoot prints found at the scene, but the impressions were too smeared to yield usable results. More puzzling, there were no foreign fingerprints anywhere in the house, not even in the bathroom, where evidence suggested the perpetrator had taken a shower. Detectives believed the attack began in the kitchen, near the wall phone where Karen had made her last call. A bloodied hammer was found nearby, possibly the initial weapon used. No knife matching the wounds was located in the house, leading investigators to conclude the killer had brought it with him and taken it when he fled. The hammer had come from a cabinet inside the home. The killer had apparently searched for it before the attack. From the same cabinet, he also took a pair of women's gloves, items that were missing and believed to have been taken with him during his escape. Nothing else appeared to be stolen. Valuables were untouched, casting doubt on robbery as a motive. An autopsy later revealed that Karen had suffered 18 stab wounds, which were ruled the cause of death. Medical examiners also confirmed that she had been assaulted, and biological evidence was recovered. But in 1984, DNA testing was still in its early stages and could not yet be used to identify a suspect. One final detail stood out. A piece of chewing gum was found stuck to the victim's shorts. Karen had only recently had her braces removed and had been excited to chew gum again. The discovery raised questions. Had she dropped it? Or had the killer placed it there for reasons unknown? The mystery only deepened. With no solid leads, investigators turned to the public for help. They asked residents to report any suspicious men seen riding bicycles or acting strangely in the area. Police also began reviewing the records of individuals with prior offenses for burglary, or breaking and entering, hoping to find a possible connection. Karen Slattery's murder shook the quiet town to its core. Fear spread quickly. Parents no longer allowed their children to go anywhere alone. What had once been a trusting, close-knit community now lived under a cloud of dread. The high school's babysitting program underwent immediate changes. The once normal practice of sending teen babysitters to clients' homes was now viewed as too dangerous. New guidelines were introduced. Babysitters were told to double-check all windows and doors, remain alert at all times, and, if possible, work in pairs. Some families were even encouraged to drop off their children at the sitter's home and pick them up afterward. Meanwhile, the local police department threw everything it had at the case. Under pressure from a terrified community, investigators worked around the clock to catch the person responsible. They spoke with the two girls Karen had been babysitting, hoping for any clue. One of the children recalled waking up during the night and seeing a man with blood on his face, but she couldn't remember anything else. As the investigation stalled, suspicion briefly shifted toward the parents. There was no clear motive, but some questioned their decision to leave their daughter's home that night. The suspicion intensified when just 2 days after the murder, the family abruptly moved out of state. To many, it seemed like they were running from something. Not long after the initial investigation stalled, a new lead emerged, by accident. An officer working on an unrelated burglary case involving a mobile home tracked down a suspect who had been getting around on a bicycle. That alone wouldn't have raised concern, except the detective noticed two curious details: what appeared to be blood on the bike's handlebars and a piece of chewing gum lodged in the spokes. The gum was the same color as the one found on Karen Slattery's shorts. The bicycle was sent to the lab for testing. Investigators began to consider whether Karen's murder could have been a burglary gone wrong, but the results told a different story. The gum turned out to be a different flavor, and the suspected blood was nothing more than chipped red paint. The trail went cold again. Meanwhile, Karen's friends and family launched a reward fund in hopes of generating new leads. What began as $10,000 quickly grew to $30,000, then $50,000, as the community rallied behind the effort. People were desperate for answers, not just for Karen's family, but for their own peace of mind. The increased reward led to a flood of calls. Thousands of tips poured into the police department. Officers did their best to follow up on everyone. A significant number of callers continued to push the theory that the family Karen had been babysitting for might be involved. The speculation became so widespread that investigators were forced to make a public statement. The parents were not considered suspects, and their alibi had been fully verified. Still, the real killer remained unknown. Not long after the investigation stalled, a woman living just a few blocks from the crime scene contacted police with a strange report. She had come home to find drops of blood on the floor and a note addressed to her nephew. Detectives tracked down the nephew, who confirmed her story. The note, he explained, had been written by a 22-year-old friend with a criminal history. That friend had left the state the day after Karen Slattery's murder. Police located the man in Ohio. He admitted to writing the note and dropping it through the mail slot, but claimed he never saw any blood and firmly denied having anything to do with the crime. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample and agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, several of his answers were flagged as deceptive. Still, he continued to deny any involvement. Without solid evidence, investigators couldn't make an arrest and had to let him go. Around the same time, the county police department acquired a state-of-the-art fingerprint detection device. one that could identify prints with 10 times the sensitivity of previous technology. Detectives working Karen's case requested access and returned to the crime scene. This time, they uncovered dozens of new prints. But after running them through the system, every one of them was matched to family members or known visitors. Weeks passed. Police followed up on thousands of tips and interviewed countless suspects. But none of it brought them any closer to Karen's killer. As the investigation into Karen Slattery's murder dragged on, the situation in the city only grew more challenging. Violent crime had surged to near-record highs. Murders, assaults, and break-ins were on the rise, stretching the police force thin. At one point, authorities even urged parents to fingerprint their children to help identify them in the event of a kidnapping, a request that many families took seriously. For weeks, Karen's case remained cold. Then, everything changed. On May 29th, 2 months after Karen's murder, police were called to the home of 38-year-old Georgiana Warren, just a few miles from Karen's town. What they found was disturbingly familiar. Georgiana's body was discovered in her bed, a pillow covering her face. A hammer lay nearby. The house showed clear signs of a struggle, blood in the bedroom and bathroom, and once again, evidence that the killer had taken a shower. Investigators believed he had entered through a window. The medical examiner confirmed that Georgiana had been assaulted. Biological material was recovered. Detectives were immediately struck by the similarities between this case and Karen's. The methods, the details, it was nearly identical. Just like before, 2 children were present in the home, Georgiana's daughters, but they were left unharmed and claimed to have heard nothing. Everyone, from the investigators to the community, believed the same person was responsible for both killings. But just like before, no fingerprints were found. With no solid leads, investigators turned their attention to a book found next to Georgiana Warren's bed. Hoping the killer might have touched it during the attack, they decided to examine every page using the department's new fingerprint detection device. The effort paid off. On page 43, they found a foreign fingerprint, one that didn't belong to anyone in the household. It could very well belong to the killer. In 1984, there were no digital fingerprint databases, so detectives had to manually compare the print to those of known suspects, hoping for a match. Meanwhile, they discovered a possible link between Georgiana and Karen. One of Karen Slattery's friends had recently babysat for Georgiana's children, just days before the murder. Detective Kevin McCoy began to wonder if the person responsible for these murders might also be connected to other unsolved attacks in the area. The killer's ability to avoid leaving fingerprints, evade witnesses, and slip away undetected suggested a level of experience, and perhaps a longer criminal history. Then McCoy remembered another case, one he had investigated a month before Karen's murder. In Boca Raton, a man had broken into a woman's home, entered her bedroom, and struck her repeatedly with a heavy object. He removed her clothing and took her ring, but then left without completing the crime. The woman survived, but the attack left her with severe brain damage. McCoy had always found the case unsettling. Now, he believed it could be connected. But there was a problem. The victim was unable to recall anything about her attacker. As Detective Kevin McCoy continued connecting the dots, he uncovered another disturbing case. On May 22nd, just 2 months after Karen Slattery's murder, a woman returned home with her son around 2 a.m. To their shock, they saw a man removing the security screen from their window, clearly trying to break in. The son gave chase as the man jumped on a bicycle and tried to escape. The suspect briefly got away, but the son caught up and tackled him. A struggle followed, but the man managed to break free, leapt into a nearby canal, and vanished into the darkness. In his rush to flee, the man left behind his bicycle and his sneakers, which were found beneath the window. It appeared he had removed them just before the homeowners arrived. 2 days later, another woman in the same town was jolted awake by a heavy blow to the head. She screamed, and the intruder fled before she could get a clear look. That same evening, a man burst into a woman's bedroom and threatened her. But when she screamed, he turned and ran. 4 days after that, a third woman had a similar encounter. A man broke into her home, frightened her, and fled, tripping and falling into her swimming pool on the way out. To McCoy, the pattern was becoming undeniable. He soon shifted his attention to a series of incidents reported by female students at a nearby university. Over several months, a man had been seen exposing himself and breaking into dormitories. The victims all gave similar descriptions: a white male, average height, short dark hair. Police compiled the details and produced a composite sketch. The suspect was no longer just a shadow in the dark. With the composite sketch in hand, Detective Kevin McCoy turned to a thick binder of mugshots, each belonging to individuals previously charged with sex-related offenses. He flipped through the pages methodically until one face stopped him cold. It was nearly identical to the sketch. McCoy pulled the photo, shuffled it in with several others, and showed the group to one of the university students who had seen the suspect. She didn't hesitate. She pointed directly to him. The man was 23-year-old Dwayne Owen, a repeat offender with a criminal record that included theft, public indecency, and other charges. It was enough for a warrant. But McCoy faced one major problem. No one knew where Owen was. He issued a citywide alert and distributed Owen's photo to every patrol officer. It didn't take long. A few days later, a female officer on routine patrol spotted a man who bore a strong resemblance to the wanted suspect. She approached him and asked for ID. He handed her a military ID under the name Dan Brown. The officer was suspicious. The man looked too much like Dwayne Owen. She detained him and brought him in for questioning. Fingerprint analysis confirmed it. It was him. Owen was immediately charged with possession of a false ID, giving authorities the leverage they needed to hold him in custody while they worked to build the larger case, one that now included multiple home invasions, assaults, and possibly 2 murders. During questioning, Dwayne Owen admitted that the bicycle and sneakers left behind at the attempted break-in belonged to him. He also confessed to several burglaries in the area. But when it came to the murders, he denied any involvement. At the time, DNA technology wasn't advanced enough to link him to the biological evidence recovered from the scenes. So detectives pressed on, relying on interrogation. Owen didn't make it easy. He seemed to enjoy the process, answering in riddles, reciting poetry, and playing games with investigators. When asked directly if he had ever killed someone, he replied simply, "Yes." But he offered no further explanation. When they asked how many, he went silent. Then, slowly, he drew the number 2 on the table with his finger. He boasted about his knowledge of criminology and claimed he could commit crimes without getting caught. But he had missed one detail. While he talked, analysts had been comparing his fingerprints to the one recovered from page 43 of Georgiana Warren's bedside book. It was a match. When detectives returned to the room and told him his print had been found at the scene, Owen smiled and said, "I must have touched that stupid book lying on the bed." Then, almost casually, he began to talk. And soon, he confessed, laying out every detail of the murder. Dwayne Owen gave a chilling account of Georgiana Warren's murder. He described wandering the streets, looking for a house with a potential victim, breaking in, and carrying out the attack. He recalled the details clearly, every step of the night. One of the most disturbing details, Owen had brought a clean change of clothes and left them on his bicycle, planning to change after the crime. It was premeditated. Still, Owen denied any involvement in Karen Slattery's murder, and investigators had no physical evidence tying him to the scene. So one detective took a gamble. He had collected Owen's footprints, but the prints at Karen's crime scene were all too smudged to match. Undeterred, the detective pulled a random photo of a bloody footprint from another case, placed it next to Owen's print, and claimed it was a match. To his surprise, the bluff worked. Owen stared at the photos and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "they do look alike." Soon after, he began to confess. He told detectives he had been riding his bicycle around the neighborhood that night. Around 8 p.m., he spotted Karen through a window and decided to kill her. Before acting, he went to a local bar, had a drink, and stayed for a while. Then he returned to the house after dark. Owen said he watched Karen through the window for some time. Then, to avoid leaving fingerprints, he removed his socks and slipped them over his hands. He quietly entered the home, found a closet, and hid inside. There, he discovered a pair of women's gloves and a hammer. Owen told detectives that after some time, he saw Karen walk into the kitchen and pick up the phone. Panicking, he assumed she had seen him and was calling the police. He burst out of the closet, attacked her, and dragged her into the master bedroom. After the assault, Owen took a shower, gathered his bloody clothes, and exited the house. He hid the clothes in nearby bushes. With a smirk, he mocked the investigators, saying they had missed them. "You didn't check all the bushes, did you?" As for the knife, he claimed he rode his bicycle to the ocean and tossed it into the water. He then returned home, where he lived with his brother and another roommate. There, he carried out a calculated move to establish a false alibi. Owen set the kitchen wall clock back by 2 hours, then made loud noises to wake his roommates. When they came out to see what was going on, he casually asked, "What time is it now?" Both men looked at the clock, which now showed the wrong time, just as Owen had planned. With his full confession on record, Dwayne Owen was formally charged with the murders of Karen Slattery and Georgiana Warren. He was placed in custody to await trial. As investigators looked deeper into Owen's past, they uncovered a deeply troubled history. Owen's childhood was marked by instability. Both parents, addicted to drugs and alcohol, died while he was still young. He and his brother were placed in multiple foster homes, moving from one to the next. As an adult, Owen briefly served in the military and later enrolled in college, taking courses in criminal justice. He once hoped to become a police officer, but a minor criminal conviction ended that possibility. Frustrated by his failed ambitions, Dwayne Owen turned to a darker path. After being charged with the murders, he confessed to a string of other crimes: assaults, indecent exposure, voyeurism, and numerous break-ins. Still, he insisted that Karen Slattery and Georgiana Warren were the only two people he had ever killed. While awaiting trial, Owen nearly pulled off a bold escape. He climbed into a prison trash bin, hoping it would be loaded onto a truck and carried out of the facility. Fortunately, guards discovered him before he could get away. The trial for Karen's murder began 1 year later. Owen refused to plead guilty. His attorneys argued that his confession had been coerced and that his rights had been violated. But once jurors heard the full taped confession in court, there was little doubt about his guilt. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 death sentences, one for each murder. On top of that, he received 6 life sentences for his other crimes. Owen was sent to death row, where he has remained ever since. But the story didn't end there. Not long after, Owen filed an appeal in Karen's case. He claimed that his right to remain silent had been violated, pointing to several moments during his interrogation where he said, "I don't want to talk about this," but detectives continued questioning him. To the shock of many, the court accepted his argument. All charges related to Karen Slattery's murder were dropped. The prosecution appealed the decision to drop the charges in Karen Slattery's case. After 7 years of legal battles, a new trial was granted, and once again, the result was the same. Dwayne Owen received a death sentence. Since then, Owen remained on death row. As is often the case with capital punishment, years passed between sentencing and execution. This case was no exception. Owen's execution was finally scheduled for June 15, 2023, nearly 39 years after the murders. Karen's younger sister was there. She had waited decades for this moment and came to witness the death of the man who took her sister's life. She had hoped to look Owen in the eye, but he kept his eyes shut until the very end. Her presence that day carried deeper meaning. After Karen's murder, she suffered from chronic insomnia. Sleep rarely came easy. Eventually, she decided that if she couldn't sleep, she might as well use her time to help others. She chose a path of service and justice. She became a sheriff. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.